In the golden haze of a European summer, in 1914, the continent shimmered with unshakable confidence. Grand boulevards in Paris echoed with the laughter of café patrons sipping absinthe beneath striped awnings, while horse-drawn carriages mingled with the first sputtering motorcars along the Champs-Élysées. In London, the Thames carried barges laden with goods from every corner of the empire, and the docks rang with the shouts of stevedores unloading tea and spices under a sky streaked with coal smoke. Vienna's opera houses glowed with crystal chandeliers as waltzes drifted through open windows, and Berlin's factories hummed day and night, forging steel for railways that stretched across the continent like iron veins. From the onion domes of St. Petersburg to the marble halls of Rome, the great powers stood at the height of their glory, their empires encircling the globe and their armies marching in perfect formation during endless parades. Yet beneath the surface of this glittering age, something ancient and restless stirred. The collapse did not begin with the roar of artillery or the tramp of marching boots. It began quietly in the coded telegrams exchanged between chancelleries and the secret treaties signed in smoke-filled rooms, and in the unspoken fear that one power's rise meant another's inevitable decline. No one understood what was coming next. The world that had known relative peace since the Congress of Vienna now balanced on a knife edge of ambition and alliance, and the first faint tremors were already rippling through the fabric of European society. For nearly a century, the map of Europe had been drawn in the careful ink of diplomats determined to prevent another Napoleon. The great powers Britain, France, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Russia, and the fading Ottoman Empire maintained a delicate balance of influence through congresses and royal marriages. Industry had transformed the countryside, turning sleepy villages into sprawling manufacturing hubs where steam engines powered looms and furnaces that lit the night sky. Railways stitched the continent together, carrying passengers in velvet-lined compartments and freight cars heavy with iron ore and grain. Telegraphs hummed with news from distant colonies, while newspapers celebrated the march of progress from the conquest of Africa to the wonders displayed at world's fairs. Monarchs still ruled by divine right, yet parliaments and socialist movements whispered of change. The air itself smelled of progress, coal dust, and optimism. Daily life moved to the rhythm of factory whistles, church bells, and the clatter of typewriters in government offices. Aristocrats hosted lavish balls where debutantes in silk gowns danced under gaslight, while workers in tenements shared thin soup and stories of strikes that never quite succeeded. In the countryside, peasants still harvested wheat by hand, singing folk songs passed down through generations, unaware that the soil they tilled would soon feed armies instead of families. This was the Europe that believed itself eternal, a continent of reason and empire, where war had become a relic of a barbarous past. Yet even in the sunlit routines of 1914, the ordinary rhythms of life carried subtle fractures. In the crowded markets of Budapest, housewives haggled over bread prices that rose with every new tariff, while children played beside soldiers drilling in public squares, their wooden rifles carved with care. Parisian artists in Montmartre sketched the Seine at dusk, capturing the reflection of electric street lamps that promised modernity but also cast long shadows across the cobblestones. In Manchester, mill girls tied their hair beneath scarves and labored 12-hour shifts, breathing cotton dust that would one day be replaced by the acrid smoke of war factories. Russian peasants in the vast steppes bowed to icons in wooden churches, praying for good harvests, as their sons were conscripted into an army still equipped with lances and sabers from another era. The upper classes attended horse races and yacht regattas, discussing the latest motorcar models and the thrilling possibility of flight, while servants polished silver and kept silent about the growing unrest in the servants' halls. Newspapers printed glowing accounts of royal visits and colonial triumphs, but the classified sections carried discreet advertisements for emigration to America, where opportunities seemed limitless. Daily existence felt solid and predictable, yet an undercurrent of anxiety ran through conversations in drawing rooms and public houses, as if everyone sensed the ground shifting beneath their feet without daring to name it. The collapse did not announce itself with chaos. It began in these small, unnoticed moments when routine masked the gathering storm. The early warning signs were invisible to those who lived through them, yet they accumulated like cracks in a porcelain vase. Nationalism had awakened in the Balkans, where Serbs, Croats, and Bosnians dreamed of independent states carved from the aging Austro-Hungarian Empire. In Ireland, Home Rule agitation simmered, threatening the unity of the British Crown. Across Germany, pan-German societies spoke of uniting all German-speaking peoples, while in France, revanchist voices still called for the return of Alsace-Lorraine, lost in 1871. Colonial rivalries flared in Africa and the Pacific, where Britain and Germany clashed over scraps of desert and jungle. The arms race accelerated as battleship keels were laid down in shipyards from Kiel to Portsmouth, each new dreadnought rendering the last obsolete. Militarism became fashionable. Officers in crisp uniforms strolled boulevards, and military budgets consumed ever larger portions of national treasuries. Yet these tensions were discussed in diplomatic language as manageable disputes to be settled at the conference table. No one connected the dots the way a single spark in a powder magazine could ignite the entire continent. The invisible warnings piled higher, the rigid alliance system, the cult of the offensive, the belief that a short, sharp war would cleanse old grievances. By the time the signs became clear, it was already too late, for the quiet mechanisms of restraint had been dismantled piece by piece. Rising tension wrapped itself around Europe like a tightening noose. The Moroccan crisis of 1905 and 1911 had brought Germany and France to the brink, yet diplomats congratulated themselves on averting disaster. In the Balkans, 2 wars in 1912 and 1913 redrew maps and left Serbia emboldened, Austria-Hungary humiliated, and Russia eager to protect its Slavic brothers. Secret military plans gathered dust in safes, each one promising swift victory through rapid mobilization. The naval rivalry between Britain and Germany poisoned relations, turning cousins into rivals, as Kaiser Wilhelm II demanded a fleet to rival the Royal Navy. Economic competition intensified, tariffs rose, and markets were carved into spheres of influence. Public opinion swung between jingoistic pride and nervous pacifism, with newspapers fanning both flames. In the Chancelleries, generals pressed for preemptive action, arguing that delay would only weaken their position. The great powers watched one another with narrowed eyes, each convinced that the other plotted encirclement. Yet life continued. The opera seasons opened, the harvest festivals proceeded, and children still learned history that spoke of glory, not catastrophe. The tension was real, but it felt distant, abstract, a matter for diplomats rather than dinner tables. The collapse did not begin with chaos. It began in these calculated moves and miscalculations that locked the continent into an inflexible dance of death. Key decisions and fatal pressures mounted in the final years before the rupture. The German General Staff refined the Schlieffen Plan, a lightning strike through Belgium to crush France before turning east against Russia. Austria-Hungary obsessed over the Serbian threat, drafted ultimatums that left no room for compromise. Russia expanded its army, promising to field millions, yet its railways remained inadequate for rapid deployment. France clung to the doctrine of the offensive à outrance, believing Élan alone could overcome machine guns. Britain maintained splendid isolation until the Anglo-French Entente and the naval agreement with Russia quietly aligned her with the continent. Domestic pressures compounded the danger. Socialist parties gained seats in parliaments, threatening to withhold war credits, while labor strikes paralyzed industries. Monarchs and ministers faced the choice between prestige and prudence, and almost always chose prestige. Intelligence reports were misread, telegrams worded too harshly, and old grudges allowed to fester. The system of alliances meant that a local quarrel in the Balkans could drag every great power into the fray, yet no one revised the treaties or created genuine mechanisms for arbitration. The pressures were economic, military, and psychological, each reinforcing the others until the entire structure trembled. By the time the Archduke's motorcade rolled into Sarajevo, the stage had been set for irreversible tragedy. The moment the system began to fail arrived on a sun-drenched street in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. A young Bosnian Serb named Gavrilo Princip stepped from the crowd and fired 2 shots that killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie. In Vienna, the news was received with cold calculation rather than grief. The emperor saw an opportunity to crush Serbia once and for all. Telegrams flew between capitals, each government believing it could control the crisis. Austria issued an ultimatum so harsh it was designed to be rejected. Russia ordered partial mobilization to protect its ally. Germany issued its own blank check of support to Austria, while France urged restraint yet prepared its own forces. Britain still hoped for mediation, even as its foreign secretary warned that the lamps were going out all over Europe. Within weeks, the intricate web of alliances activated like a machine built for destruction. Mobilization orders went out, and once armies began to move, diplomacy collapsed under the weight of railway timetables and honor. The moment the system began to fail was not dramatic, it was bureaucratic. The turning of keys, the stamping of documents, the clicking of telegraph keys that set millions in motion toward the trenches. No one understood what was coming next, yet the machinery of war had already been engaged. Human consequences unfolded with terrifying speed as the old order cracked. Families watched sons and husbands board trains decorated with flowers and patriotic slogans, the soldiers singing as they departed for what they believed would be a short campaign before Christmas. Cities emptied of young men, factories shifted to war production, and women took up roles once reserved for males. The first battles at the frontiers produced casualty lists that stunned even the most hardened generals. In the countryside, crops rotted in fields because there were no hands left to harvest them. Food shortages appeared almost immediately as railways were commandeered for troops. Social breakdown began quietly in the queues for bread, in the whispered rumors of battlefield horrors, and in the growing realization that the war would not end quickly. Intellectuals who had celebrated progress now watched their libraries burn in propaganda bonfires. The air filled with the scent of burning paper and the distant thunder of artillery that soon reached every capital. Fear settled over the continent like a fog. People continued their daily routines, yet the laughter in cafes grew forced, and the silence in churches grew heavier. The collapse had arrived not as a single cataclysm, but as 1,000 small ruptures in the fabric of ordinary life. The long-term historical impact reshaped the world in ways no pre-war statesman could have imagined. 4 empires, the German, the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian, and the Ottoman, lay in ruins. Their crowns toppled, their territories fragmented into new nation-states, drawn by diplomats in distant drawing rooms. The map of Europe was redrawn with borders that ignored ethnic realities, sowing seeds for future conflicts. The United States emerged as the world's leading creditor, while the old European balance of power dissolved into ideological struggle. The war's cost in blood and treasure exceeded anything previously conceived. Millions dead, economies shattered, and societies traumatized. The Treaty of Versailles imposed penalties that bred resentment rather than reconciliation. New ideologies, communism and fascism, rose from the ashes, promising order amid the chaos. Technology that had promised progress delivered poison gas and aerial bombardment, forever changing the nature of warfare. The old certainties of monarchy, aristocracy, and colonial empire crumbled, replaced by mass democracy and the uneasy peace of the 1920s. Europe before World War I became a memory, a lost world of elegance and illusion, whose end marked the true beginning of the 20th century's age of extremes. Yet even as the guns fell silent in 1918, the echoes of that pre-war summer lingered like a ghost in the ruins. The continent, that had once believed itself the pinnacle of civilization, had learned the terrible fragility of peace, built on pride and paper treaties. The grand palaces still stood, but their halls were empty of the laughter that once filled them. The factories that had hummed with peaceful industry now bore the scars of conversion, and the fields that had grown wheat now held row upon row of white crosses. Historians would later debate the precise causes, the ifs, and the what might have beens, yet those who lived through the collapse understood something simpler: the world had changed forever in ways no treaty could restore. The collapse did not end with armistice, it continued in the hearts of those who remembered the before and mourned the after. Europe before World War I stands as a cautionary tableau, a reminder that prosperity and progress are never guarantees against the forces of ambition, fear, and miscalculation that can unravel centuries in a single summer. The lamps that went out in 1914 have never been fully relit, and the silence that followed the last shot still carries the faint whisper of what was lost.